Podcast 411, Item 230. Today's guest is Ben Greenfield, host of the Ben Greenfield Fitness podcast and the Get Fit Guy podcast.
Podcast411.com. Listen different.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Rob, and this is the Podcast 411 podcast. In this episode, I have a long-delayed interview with Ben Greenfield. Note, this interview was recorded over 2 years ago in early 2014, and I apologize to Ben for the delay on getting this up. Please keep note of that timing when listening to this interview. I'll talk more about the delay at the end of the show and why finally 411 is back. As always, your feedback is greatly appreciated. Give us a call, 206-666-4357. That's 206-MOM-HELP. Or send an email to podcast411@gmail.com. And now on to the interview with Ben Greenfield. Here we go. Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Rob.
First question I always ask, what was your first computer?
My first computer was awesome. I remember that my grandma had set up like a little college fund for all of us kids, and I somehow convinced her to let me spend that college money when I was like 13 years old back in high school on this beast of a computer. I think even, back then, which would have been like 1996, I think, it was like a $5,000 unit, and I somehow convinced her that I was going to be using it to prepare myself for the rigors of academia, and I got that thing loaded up with every game and graphic card imaginable, and just basically geeked out on Warcraft for the next few years.
So how good did that go towards your grades, and how well and how much was it worth when it came time to go to college to sell it?
You know what? I had it for a while. I had it till my sophomore year of college. It was a Dell. I have no clue. I don't remember what it was. It was just a big Dell desktop, and I used it for school and stuff, but I remember all my friends wanted to come over and play on Ben Greenfield's computer.
Well, you went to college, so that's the important thing. So you can say to your grandma, see, this helped me get in.
Mm-hmm. See, it all worked out.
Do you remember the first podcast you listened to?
You know what? It's really, really tough. That is a tough question. I'm not sure that I had listened to a podcast before I started experimenting with podcasting myself, because I had videos that I wanted to put out, and I knew that iTunes was one place where you could publish videos, and YouTube as well, obviously, and there were a few other channels that I was looking at, but that was back when I was running personal training studios and gyms, and I basically would read research articles, and I'd get on there for 4 or 5 minutes, and I would give my spiel of how I was interpreting that research article as far as like how it would help people get fit or lose fat or build muscle. And eventually I figured out that if I just did the audio rather than using my video and a camera, that I didn't have to do my hair. So then I started doing audio. But as far as the first podcast, I don't think I'd listened to a podcast before I started experimenting with that. And I would say that my first memory of a podcast that I listened to probably would have been, honestly, ironically, Endurance Planet, which was around in about, I think that was 2004, 2005, which is actually a podcast that I now own. But back when I was a triathlete looking for things to listen to while I was riding, I think that was one of the very first ones that I heard, because it was one of the first endurance type of podcasts that kind of existed.
Tell the listeners a little bit about the podcasts you are doing now, what some of them are.
Well, now my main podcast that I do twice a week is called the Ben Greenfield Fitness podcast, and that has kind of two components. One is that we do listener Q&A, so we take questions via SpeakPipe, and we play them back during the podcast and then answer them. And they're questions about everything from like, which supplements do I take, to does this particular diet work, to what's your opinion of the latest study on whatever, red meat being as bad as smoking cigarettes, to how do I get rid of this last little bit of fat around my belly. And so we also do a little bit of news flashes on the latest research that's come out in fitness and medicine and health and nutrition. And then we do some special announcements, like where I might be speaking, or, books or programs that I've done lately. And that comes out every Wednesday. And then we also do on Saturdays an interview with a special guest. Like last week, I did an interview with a guy named Dave Asprey about mold in the home. And the week before was with a guy named Jack Cruz about how you could mitigate the effects of like exposure to cell phones and Wi-Fi routers and stuff like that. And so I try and bring some kind of cutting edge, non-run of the mill type of interviewee in every Saturday, and then just do the Q&A shows midweek. That's the main one. And then I also do a very kind of quick 5 to 10 minute podcast every week called the Get Fit Guys podcast. And that one is a little bit more, well, I should say less geeky, less nerdy, less non-run of the mill, and really just delves into general fitness topics and how to get stronger, how to run faster, how to lose fat. It's a little bit more palatable to just kind of the general population or somebody who might be not quite in full-on biohack my body mode, but kind of more, and I need to get off the couch type of mode. And then also I do Endurance Planet, which is a podcast for triathletes, marathoners, adventure racers, cyclists, swimmers, people like that. And we do anywhere from 3 to 5 podcasts a week on that platform. I'm not the host of that one. A girl down in California hosts it, but she does interviews and, this week in endurance, and she does a endurance sports nutrition episode with me, and, an Ask the Doctor and an Ask the Coach and an Ask the Ultra Runner. And we're going to be adding in kind of an obstacle racing segment for all the Spartan racers and the crazy, Tough Mudder type of folks out there. So those are some of the main podcasts that I do.
I heard you recently did one of the Spartan ones. You mentioned
I
that.
did. Man, that was a hoot. Those are a lot of fun. They're incredibly tough compared to like triathlon, where you're pretty nice and clean during a triathlon. You kind of have your spandex and you're on your nice sleek little bike, and you've got your superhero looking wetsuit, and it's kind of like a clean, pristine sport compared to obstacle racing, which is like climbing under barbed wire and jumping through fire and wading through mud, and completely different type of race. But I think Spartan racing's fantastic. I think it's going to take the world by storm, honestly. Not just Spartan racing, but obstacle racing in general, because I think people more and more these days are going to want to rebel against that safe bubble of an office and a nice, clean cubicle, and instead just go out and get their hands dirty and kind of be a weekend warrior, literally, going out and throwing spears, and you got to fight against gladiators to get to the finish line. It's just crazy.
Now, I don't know how you have time to do all this with all those podcasts. Because you're doing quite a few. You're doing quite a bit.
I have not attempted a podcast while riding a bicycle, but I do know there are some people that go that far.
Yo, Steve at Fidipidations, he records while he's running.
And Brett at Zentry podcast, I think, does that too. He does an entire self-supported Ironman while podcasting once a year, actually.
You mentioned you get listener feedback, and I've had this note here for a while to ask you about the grandma that called in about a grandson's stomach bleeding. Probably best not waiting for a podcast to answer questions about internal bleeding.
Yeah, we get some questions about that. I got in a bicycle accident last week and got a concussion, and this week I'm having trouble seeing, and it's like, dude, that's not for the podcast. That's for your doctor, or maybe even the ambulance that should be pulling up in front of your house. So we, of course, always play the medical disclaimer on the show, but holy cow, it does surprise me. Some of the questions that we get, that's just like...
Yeah, I was going to say, you must roll your eyes when you see them.
Yeah, actually, I have a podcast sidekick named Brock who lives over in Toronto, Canada, and he actually listens to the questions and screens the questions. So a lot of times these days, I don't even see many of the questions unless they actually kind of make it through to the podcast. But we get dozens of questions every week, and occasionally he'll send me some of the ones that are super crazy that we just know we're not going to respond to on a podcast. And yeah, there's stuff like that, like bleeding stomach and messed up vision from head injuries and children having trouble breathing and anaphylaxis and just all this stuff that you would think people would not be waiting for a podcast to ask.
Do you remember any memorable questions that you thought were really good, or it's just something out there that people should need to know about on fitness side?
Oh, we've had a lot of them. One of the recent ones was, for example, on the study that said antioxidants are bad for you. And that one really kind of took the media world by storm, and everybody said, "Oh, quit taking vitamin C, quit taking vitamin E. It's worse for you than smoking. It's going to kill you." And we get questions like this a lot. And when you delve in and you actually go and read the study, for example, a study like that, they're dumping a bunch of synthetic vitamin C and synthetic vitamin E, way, way different than what you'd get from fruits and vegetables or even from whole food sources of antioxidants into people's body, and finding out that, lo and behold, when you dump chemical derivatives into the body, it doesn't respond that well. But, there's a big, big difference between what the media will report when they catch wind of a news story versus what really happened. The latest one on protein being bad for you is very, very similar. All that study showed was that if you're between the age of 50 and 65 years old and you eat too much protein, it could potentially increase your risk of diabetes.
The way the headlines were was eating too much protein is worse than smoking so many packs of cigarettes a day or something like that was the way one of them was spun. And I was like, what?
Exactly. And if you actually look at the math and the research, eating too much protein, if you're between the age of 50 to 65, was about 1,000 times less damaging than smoking, but did indeed increase your risk of diabetes compared to eating slightly less protein. And that's all that study showed. But once again, the media takes this stuff, it runs with it, it reports eating protein is as bad as whatever they said, cigarette smoking, or increases your risk of dying as much as cigarette smoking. And it's like, no, just because USA Today says that does not mean that it's true. You have to either go listen to the research or read the research or listen to my podcast, because I go and read it and tell you what really is going on.
Now, one thing you've mentioned a few times is about fluorinated water. You don't seem to be a fan there.
No, I'm not a big fan of fluoride. Fluoride is, it's got a lot of issues with it. But, for example, one of the issues is it acts very, very similarly to iodine in your body. And iodine is one of the crucial minerals that your thyroid receptor uses. And so when you dump a bunch of fluoride into your body, it can affect the activity of your thyroid gland and your metabolism. And fluoride is very good for the teeth. It does indeed stop tooth decay. But once it goes into your body, it's far different. So if you use a fluoridated toothpaste and you're not swallowing the toothpaste, it's not that bad for you, and it may indeed help a little bit with tooth decay. Once we get municipalities fluoridating water that people are drinking, that's far, far different.
I live in one of those municipalities. So what should I do? What do you recommend?
I recommend that you do a double filtration in your home. One of the best ones that you can get is a reverse osmosis water filter. And you can get like a central water filter that just filters all the water that goes into your house. And a plumber can install that for you. And it's pretty easy to get installed. And then ideally, you combine a reverse osmosis filter with a carbon filter. So you're filtering out all of the little harmful minerals and unfortunately, the pharmaceuticals that wind up in our water supply, the fluoride, the chlorine, everything. And the only problem with that type of really, really careful and safe filtration scenario is you also filter out some of the microparticles in the water. Water has 80 plus different minerals in it that actually are healthy for you. And so if you're doing that, then you actually have to either remineralize the water or just take minerals. So, for example, what I have a lot of folks doing who are filtering their houses or their house water pretty regularly is they're using things like Himalayan sea salts or Himalayan rock salts that have lots of trace liquid minerals in them. You can get liquid minerals that you can just take as a shot in the morning to replace some of the minerals that you might be filtering out of your water, along with the bad stuff. It may seem unnatural or inconvenient, but it's one of those things that you need to do if you are beholden to what your city has decided to do to the water. You want to mitigate some of the damage, but you also don't want to miss out on the good stuff. So you basically filter everything out of the water, and then you add the good stuff back in. And that's really the best way to go.
I'm someone that's taken some of your advice, and for those that don't know, I've gone from 240, I've taken my weight all the way down to 180, and I'm in the 185 range now. And one thing I did recently was I did one of those 6 days water fasts, which is tough. But one piece of advice you have that I don't think I could ever do is the cold shower. It's like I have to draw a line.
I used to say the same thing, though. I really did. Like I thought that was the most uncomfortable thing in the world, and one of the nicest things about my morning was that nice, hot, warm shower. You know, it was like a teddy bear. You know, when it's almost like therapeutic. But when you go and you look at some of the fiercest like warrior populations on the face of the planet, some of the toughest folks, from the Spartans to the Cherokee Indians, these folks did a lot of cold exposure, particularly their children and their babies, and also the people who are going off to fight. They would do a lot of like jumping into cold rivers, cold lakes, ice immersion, snow immersion, stuff like that. Because it turns out that there is a huge boost in terms of pain tolerance and the stability of your nervous system. And then once you delve in and you look at the effects of cold exposure, there are other things that happen. For example, if you take a cold shower 2 hours before sex, it upregulates testosterone. If you take a cold shower after a hard day's workout, it decreases levels of inflammatory, what are called cytokines. It can increase blood flow, particularly production of something called nitric oxide, which dilates your arteries and improves blood flow to your brain and blood flow to your muscles. So if you have kind of an afternoon slump, and you know, if you're like me and you work at a home office, you go in the bathroom and you turn on the cold shower and you hop in, and it's like you just took a hour and a half long nap and you're suddenly renewed and refreshed. So you're right, Rob. It is tough to start into as a habit. What I tell my clients is, okay, so you're going to start doing cold showers. There's two things that you do. First of all, you get out a calendar. And every day that you do a cold shower, or you start off the day with a cold shower, or you end the day with a cold shower, you put a little X on the calendar. Once you make it to about 25 or 30 days, something magic happens and it suddenly becomes far easier. The other thing that you do is use hot-cold contrast, meaning you go about 20 seconds warm, and you start with the warm because it makes it a lot easier, and then you go 10 seconds cold. 20 seconds warm, 10 seconds cold. And you can do that 10 times through for a total of 5 minutes. And that hot-cold contrast, that hot-cold back and forth, actually increases blood flow in the same way that you might get if you've ever been in one of these spas and that has like the hot water next to the cold water, and you can kind of like go from the hot tub to the cold water. Awesome for hangovers, by the way, but also really, really good for increasing blood flow and making you feel like $1,000,000 when you walk out. It's kind of like going from comfortable to uncomfortable. But there are ways that you can do it to make it easier, and there's a lot of therapeutic benefits and incidentally a lot of fat loss benefits to that type of temperature regulation too.
You know, I've heard mention that the cold showers and even I think some bulimic websites tell people to use, not that I promote any of that stuff, is to use the cold shower as a way to lose weight. But then I think about it, all the hot chicks are down in Miami where the water's warm. So I'm thinking, I'm thinking what the women look like in Minnesota and Kansas City, and then I look what they look like down in Miami. I'm thinking, I'm not seeing the correlation.
Yeah, I think the women down in Miami, that might be kind of a correlation effect where the women who have nice bodies end up wind up moving to Miami to show their bodies off than it is that hot weather makes you skinny. Although I know there is a little bit of a pressure effect from having to wear a swimsuit more often. Ultimately, though, what it comes down to is there's a book by a guy named Nassim Taleb that's really good. It's called Anti-Fragile, and it goes into how we've lost our ability as humans to almost be uncomfortable, to kind of like, grow a tough skin or be able to handle, inclement conditions like temperature fluctuations, or maybe not always having our air conditioning or our heater, or sometimes having to go out and do a hard thing, not necessarily a Spartan race, but maybe even just a hard exercise session, and how kind of becoming soft mentally can also make us soft physically, as far as building up fat and really not having the fit bodies that we want. So I think there definitely is something to be said for going out of your way to do something just slightly uncomfortable every day. It kind of keeps you hard physically and hard mentally.
I don't know. I'd still be willing to give up food again for 6 days before I take my cold shower. That was, the hardest part of giving up food for 6 days was the last 2 days of that. My wife was doing a bake sale for her church, so she was baking while I'm there on my last 2 days of a fast. That was just brutal.
Yeah. Did you take anything other than water, like amino acids or anything?
Water. Just did water. Maybe that wasn't the best thing to do, but that's how I did it.
No, I mean it's not bad. There are some people that get a little bit of metabolic dysregulation from that. It's almost too stressful on some folks' bodies, especially women. For some reason, women don't do quite as well with the fasting type of diets compared to men. Maybe we're hardwired as hunter gatherers or something like that. But women sometimes get some thyroid dysregulation, and it can kind of decrease the metabolic set point if they're not too careful, especially if they fast frequently. But it's certainly a strategy that works for some people.
My way of losing the weight, the way I got from 240 down to 180 was basically mini fasts where I didn't eat each day until after I worked out, and I didn't work out until 5 o'clock at night. So and then I'd only eat basically between 6 and 9 at night, and that was the only time I'd eat during the day. And that worked for me to get the weight down, and then now I'm maintaining and I'm back to a little bit more regular. But
Nice. So kind of like an intermittent fasting approach. I do something kind of similar. I do what's called a compressed feeding window. So I usually will have breakfast sometime around 9 or 10 a.m. and then stop eating sometime around 8 p.m. And so I've got, so right around a 12-hour window every single day where I just don't eat. And it's technically called intermittent fasting. But there's some pretty good fat burning benefits from just that approach as well if you don't want to do a full-on fast.
One piece of advice, this show is coming out here in March, and we're getting into my favorite time of the year, which is hay fever season.
I thought you were going to say tax season.
No, I'm past the tax season. No, to me, I actually like the winter because it means I suffer bad from hay fever. So I try all kinds of different things. Last year I was eating yogurt once a day during that, and that kind of actually seemed to help a little bit. But any advice to hay fever sufferers?
Yeah, there's a lot of little things you can do for hay fever. I mean, the most important thing to understand is that if you have an immune system that is upregulated or that's super sensitive, that's going to make you more sensitive to anything that you're naturally allergic to. And so what that means is one of the best things that you can do if you're very prone to hay fever.
Don't say cold showers. Don't say cold showers.
Cold baths.
Okay.
Shift your diet towards an autoimmune-based diet. And what that means is you eliminate some common things that kind of put your immune system on high alert. The biggest ones are soy, particularly things like soy milk and tofu. Wheat, which is a little bit tougher to cut out, but like most forms of like gluten, that's another biggie. And then commercial dairy. Like usually organic dairy doesn't present as many problems, but like commercial dairy, like commercial regular milk, stuff like that is kind of an issue. So soy, wheat, dairy, and then for a lot of people, eggs. And many people will find if they eliminate those foods, and there are diets out there that kind of walk you through it. Like one of my favorites is called the autoimmune paleo diet. That will get rid of a lot of the issues that go along with allergic reactions, exercise-based asthma, hay fever, stuff like that. But if it's not an immune issue and you just happen to be allergic to things that are floating around in the air during the spring, there's some stuff that can work to get rid of some of the chest congestion, loosen phlegm, decrease production of histamine, things like that. So some of the better things that you can do that I like are ginger tea. And one of the best things you can put into ginger tea that will improve your tolerance to local allergens is a local raw honey. So you get a local honey that has a lot of the natural things that are going to strengthen your immune system and make you less sensitive to some of the local pollens and allergens. And you can put that in a ginger tea. And that one works really, really well as almost like a natural antihistamine. Chamomile tea is also really good. So that's kind of a natural relief for hay fever. Fish oil, if you take like a good fish oil, not a fish oil that's been heated or that hasn't been converted into its natural form, but what you want to look for when you get a fish oil is a triglyceride-based fish oil. Fish oil can actually lower inflammation. The omega-3 fatty acids in fish oil can help to lower inflammation. So that's another really good one. And then I would say the last thing that you might want to try would be peppermint oil or peppermint tea. That can often kind of clear up nasal congestion, sinus congestion. The way that I like to do peppermint oil is I actually get like the essential peppermint oil drops, which are really strong, and I'll put a few drops of that into a glass of ice water. I kind of like the nice cooling sensation it kind of gives, but it also helps to really open up your nasal passages, and I'll just sip on that while I'm working. So that's another one that you can use. I mean, there's a lot of remedies out there, but those are some of the ones that I would try.
Well, I will be trying all of those this year and probably in the next couple weeks.
There you go.
You have a book coming out. You want to talk a little bit about your book?
I've been doing what I do for a decade, helping people get fit, lose weight, kind of have that concept of minimal effective dose as far as like what are the things that you can do that are going to get you the most bang for your buck when it comes to fat loss, muscle gain, hormone optimization, mental performance, sleep, just basically all the things that really help your body to feel good. What can you do that's going to let you get those benefits safely with the least amount of work? And what I've done is taken everything that I've learned, and I wanted to write a book, and I finally got around to doing it. It's about a 540-page manual, a big hardcover book that is, my publisher describes it as a weapon. It's just a very, very heavy paperweight. And it goes into everything. It
Lift
goes
this book 10 times, multiple reps.
Exactly. Yeah, you can sell your home gym. But it's training, nutrition, lifestyle tactics, even like time management and productivity techniques, supplementation techniques, foods, diets, training sessions, workouts, brain biohacks, just like it's almost like a cookbook for anybody who wants to achieve feats of mental performance or physical performance and do so safely in a proven way. I mean, every single chapter is jam-packed with PubMed research studies and everything you need to see that this stuff actually works. And it's called Beyond Training. Because, and the reason I titled it that is because it goes into the stuff that kind of goes above and beyond, just like going to the gym and working out, like all the things that kind of get left on the table. So it's called Beyond Training. It's at beyondtrainingbook.com, and it ships in, I think, about 10 days, actually. It's going to hit the bookstores and start shipping from the website.
Check that out. Now, in addition to your main podcast, the Ben Greenfield Fitness podcast, you have a great app for that. I have your app, and I love it. And you've got not just regular content, you've got extra content, premium content. What do people get with your app?
The app has, well, first of all, it's kind of like everything from the website delivered to one place, all in your pocket. So it's a really, really good way to just have instant access to everything that I put out in terms of podcasts and content. But then we also do things like reviews of a lot of these new watches that come out that say that they're going to, track your calories or, tell you your skin perspiration and temperature and, steps taken and the amount of deep sleep that you've gotten. We review a lot of these self-quantification devices, frankly, because people send them to our show to review. So we put out those videos on the app. We have access to over 300 different audio podcasts, PDFs, videos that are kind of like the protected vault of Ben Greenfield Fitness content. That's all in the app. That's part of the kind of a shocker price here, but for the $9.99 a year price, you kind of unlock all of that, and that's part of the premium content on the app. It's got the click-throughs to all of the Twitter pages where I put out a lot of the research, the Twitter Ben Greenfield stuff, our Facebook page where we do tons of giveaways and even more content every single day, almost every single hour. And it's just kind of the place where you can have it all delivered in one convenient package. So yeah, it's a fun little app.
Your show is one I send people to one, check the app out, two, check out how you interact with your audience and the contests you have. But then you also go above and beyond, and you also do trips. Like you just came back from Mexico.
Yeah, it was fun. My wife and I went down to Mexico for 5 days and joined some other health leaders there, particularly in the ancestral health community, which means the community of folks who believe that we should kind of live more in touch with real food and with the earth, and not in like electronics filled offices and stagnant gyms filled with cleaning chemicals. So we were just like outside working out on the beach and doing a lot of playing and singing and dancing and socializing and all the things that make people live a long time. So that was down in Mexico, and then next I'll be in April headed over to something called Paleo FX, which kind of goes into living like a caveman and kind of getting in touch with your body from a physical and mental and health standpoint, and kind of living again like the way our ancestors and our grandparents or our great-grandparents might have lived or eaten. And yeah, about every month I head somewhere to speak or to talk or to interact with folks. And so
Where's the Paleo FX
on the podcast, I always mention that Paleo FX is in a great spot, Austin, Texas. So
yes. So last question I like to end with is the new podcaster starting out today. What is something that you would recommend to them now that you have a huge wealth of knowledge and many podcasts that you're producing, what is something that you would recommend to a new podcaster, or a piece of advice that you wish you kind of had gotten early on?
I would say two things. First of all, even though you should be podcasting in your passion, like podcasting something that you're passionate about, which I would hope that you're doing already, don't assume that you're talking about what your audience actually wants to hear. Instead, ask your audience what they want to hear. Now, if you have an audience on Facebook or Twitter or a blog, that's a perfect place to ask people who they might want you to interview, or what they want you to talk about, or what their questions are, what their pain points are, what's keeping them awake at night. If you don't have an audience, then go to forums that are devoted to your topic, engage in discussion there, and find out what it is that people are actually interested in, or go to Facebook pages or Google Plus pages, or even the comment section of blog posts to find out what it is that people are actually talking about. So never assume that what you're interested in is what your audience is interested in per se. So make sure that you do that. And then also know your avatar, like know the person that is listening in. And then when you're podcasting, and I do this a lot, I'll close my eyes and I'll imagine that person, for me, it's a lot of times, for example, if I'm doing the Endurance Planet podcast, I know I'm talking to the 30 to 60-year-old endurance athlete who's sitting there getting ready to go for a bike ride, or sign up for a triathlon, a little bit nervous about what it is they're going to experience, or how they're supposed to eat, or, what kind of training session they're supposed to do. And you imagine you're just kind of sitting there talking to that one person, engaging in them with discussion, as their friend, as their advisor, having that type of personal interaction, and almost that mental state of you talking to that avatar of your audience can really help you be a little bit more personable during your podcast, rather than imagining it's like you on stage in front of a bunch of people. That's what I would say. I would say make sure that you ask your audience what it is that they want to hear, and then when you actually get down to podcasting, think about that personal one-on-one interaction with the kind of the ideal member of your audience.
All right. Well, Ben, thank you for the graded for that, and for earlier. Hopefully my allergies this year will be a little bit less. And thank you for not saying I need to take cold shower to get rid of my allergies.
But you do need to take a cold shower for other reasons.
I don't know.
Just got to do it.
Oh, it's there's so many other things that I have to try first. We'll put that one down later on the list of things to change my life to get me back and more healthy.
All right. It's a deal. As long as you promise me you'll do it at some point.
I will try. I will try at some point, not just when the water heater goes out.
There you go.
All right, Ben. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on, Rob.
And thanks again to Ben for coming on the show and talking about his podcast and his book. And once again, I apologize to Ben for having his recording in the can for over 2 years. I will say this, I did follow Ben's advice that was mentioned in this episode for allergies, and the past few seasons, my allergies have been much, much better than prior years. So thanks, Ben, for your help on that. Also, make sure to check out Ben's podcast and book, which I'll have links to in the show notes for episode 230 over at podcast411.com. And speaking of podcast411.com, and where this podcast has been and why and how it is finally back, one of the biggest issues this show ran into in the past was for the hand-coded website, which I created for podcast411.com back in 2004. It was, to put it nice, a nightmare. Well, I've revamped the site completely. It is now being run off my Libsyn account. Yes, outside of tutorial pages, which I will move over soon. The rest of the pages are now part of my Libsyn podcast pages. This means two things. One, I can publish new episodes really quickly and get those posts up on the site. And two, I can also do blog posts now quickly and easily. And then, speaking of blog posts, I just put up 2 new ones at podcast411.com. First one went up on June 12th, and it's titled, Will Increasing Your Bitrate Equal More Listeners? Originally, this was an article I wrote for Pottertainment magazine, and it goes over what some of the common encoding rates are by the biggest shows in iTunes to break down and dismiss the myth that encoding your files at a higher bitrate will somehow help your show grow. It will not. And this post goes over my recommendations for a good encoding rate for your files, especially when you consider that most of the world still pays for download bandwidth. The second one went up on June 16th, and it is titled the Pod 11, the most influential entities in podcasting, and it was a response to a post, the Pod 22, the most influential people in New York City pro podcasting. Well, I added the New York City pro podcasting part to the title, but that is what it should have been titled. It was simply a horrible article and so missed the mark on podcasting space. Sadly, there is a divide that has been really getting bigger and bigger the last 2 years, and that's between the NPR, New York City Public Radio pro podcasters, which represent far less than 1% of all podcasters, and then the 99% plus of indie podcasters. The press coverage makes it sound like the New York City pro podcasters are all there are sometimes, and it is articles like Pod 22 that really drive a wedge into the community. Reality is, Libsyn is actually much more influential than all of public radio combined. Libsyn will deliver well over 25% of all the download streams people hear via iTunes and the podcast app this year. No one else is even over 10%. And all the public radio space and NYC Procasters combined do not even get to the 15% mark. Sadly, people write articles or newsletters just covering the NPR, NYC Procasters. They just don't take the time to look at the bigger 99% plus of podcasting. It will be interesting to see how podcast movement goes in July. I will actually address this in my Hall of Fame acceptance speech, where I'll call out to those that are covering the space to take some time and really cover the whole space. You'll definitely want to be there. Oh, and yes, if you've not heard, I'm getting inducted into the Podcaster Hall of Fame, which is a huge honor. Thanks to all the listeners of Podcast 411 over the years for your support. The Hall of Fame Awards will be part of the podcast movement that will be July 6th, 7th, and 8th in Chicago. I'm looking forward to seeing many of you there. Please come by and let's get a photo together. I want to get as many selfies with 411 listeners as possible. And if you're a Libsyn user, make sure to get to the Libsyn booth ASAP at the show. We have t-shirts for current customers. You just need to tell us your show slug and then take a photo with us. One thing I did with the new 411 site was add in an update to where I am speaking at section. And I want to make sure to give credit to those groups that have me out to speak. If you go to podcast411.com and you click on the speaking link, you will see future events, plus links to many of the past events that I've spoken at as well. I will be speaking at Podcast Movement and in July, and I'm on 2 different sessions. The first is a solo session titled, Yes, That Marketing Advice for Your Podcast is BS, where I cut through a lot of the BS that's passed off as advice from, quote, marketing gurus, unquote, on how to promote your show. And I get to what really does work and what definitely does not work. That session is Friday, July 8th at 10:15 a.m. The second session I'm in is a panel session on the state of podcasting, also on Friday the 8th, and that one's at 2:30 p.m. And, well, we will, talk about the state of podcasting. After Podcast Movement, I'll be speaking in Washington, D.C. on July 16th at the Blogging While Brown Conference, giving a Podcasting 101 201 session, and then a breakout Q&A session afterwards. On July 20th, I'll be speaking at the 10th. This is the 10th year in a row I'll be speaking at this event. It's Kansas Fest. That's in Kansas City. And it's the Global Apple II Conference. And I'll be speaking about iOS and watchOS and tvOS. August 6th and 7th, I'll be speaking at the Elite Man Conference in Plymouth, Mass. My session is titled Standing Out from the Crowd with Podcasting. And it's a session that goes over the power of podcasting and how you can use it to really break away from those that are just blogging or from those that have almost no or little presence on the internet. September 23rd to 25th, I'll be at the LA Podfest in Los Angeles. Then in mid-October, the 13th and 15th, I will be speaking at the Society of Adventist Communicator Conference in Denver. Again, I have a link in the show notes for these speaking events, and if you are going to any of them, please say hi. And of course, if you have an event you need someone to talk at about podcasting, please let me know. I am going to work to release a new episode probably about every other week going forward to be opposite of the weeks that I do episodes for the feed. I'll spend more time on the feed going over the latest and greatest news on podcasting, and we'll use the blog on Podcast 411 for some instant coverage, rebuttals to bad articles that are out there, plus put up posts on longer articles and tutorials. Please make sure you subscribe to the feed by going to thefeed.libsyn.com. thefeed.libsyn.com to get the show. Elsie and I will cover real podcasting news on that show, covering all of podcasting, not just the 1%. And the Podcast 411 podcast, again, is going to be more about the interviews going forward with listener voicemail and email questions. And speaking of that, as always, if you have any feedback, give us a call, 206-666-4357. That's 206-MOM-HELP. Or send an email to podcast411@gmail.com. Until the next time, I'm your host, Rob, from Podcast 411, reminding you to listen different. This podcast is proudly hosted on Libsyn.com. If you'd like to learn more about podcast hosting, go to Libsyn.com. That's LIBSYN.com, as in Liberated Syndication. Find out more about podcast hosting, podcast monetization, podcast promotion through smartphone apps, as in iOS, Android, and Windows Phone, plus many other features, including Unpublished at Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, WordPress, Google Play, Spotify, and others. Plus our new destination stats. Again, go to Libsyn.com, and if you use a promo code podcast411, you'll get the rest of this month free and all of next month free.